The sun was setting over the quiet streets, casting long shadows as a sleek black sedan rolled through a small, mostly empty neighborhood. Inside the car, a woman sat in the driver's seat, her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes scanning the road with a sharp, focused gaze. But in her rearview mirror, a flashing red and blue light appeared. Her pulse quickened, but she remained calm, because in this moment, she knew exactly what was about to happen. And what this officer didn't know was about to change everything. When Officer Martin saw the woman's car, he didn't think twice. He'd pulled over dozens of drivers before, each stop routine, each interaction predictable. His badge, his uniform, the authority they gave him, he felt it all in his bones. He couldn't have known that the woman sitting in that car was someone who had the power to make or break his career in a single moment. He couldn't have known that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The sound of his siren blared as he slowed down to follow her car. He'd been on patrol for hours and was looking for any reason to make an easy stop, maybe a traffic violation, maybe a minor infraction to fill his quota. The woman didn't seem like a threat, in fact, she seemed perfectly ordinary. But as he approached her vehicle, a strange feeling started to bubble up in the pit of his stomach. Something about her, something in the way she carried herself, made him pause for just a split second. Probably nothing, he muttered under his breath, dismissing the feeling as he flicked on the lights. The woman didn't panic. She didn't swerve or speed away. Instead, she pulled over, calmly, without hesitation. The moment she stopped, she sat still in her seat for a moment. And as Officer Martin approached her car, he saw a glimpse of something in the driver's side mirror, a glimpse of power, of composure. But, like most people, he didn't think much of it. He knocked on the window, his voice thick with authority. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you know why I stopped you?" The woman rolled down the window, her eyes meeting his with an air of quiet confidence. "No, officer, I don't. I clocked you speeding back there," he said, his tone almost rehearsed. "Do you have any idea how fast you were going?" She was silent for a moment, her eyes not leaving his. Something in the way she looked at him unsettled him, though he couldn't pinpoint why. It was as if she was studying him, sizing him up. But he shrugged it off, pulling out his ticket book. "I'm just going to need your license and registration," he said, but as the woman reached for her glove compartment, Officer Martin was already thinking about how easy this was going to be. Another simple stop, another day in the life. But as she handed him the documents, he took a quick glance at the name on her ID, and his stomach dropped. The woman's name didn't just ring a bell, it sounded the alarm. Her name was Lisa Johnson. Lisa Johnson. The very same Lisa Johnson who had been making waves in the department for years. The very same Lisa Johnson who was known for holding officers accountable for their actions. The very same Lisa Johnson who just so happened to be the head of internal affairs. The air between them seemed to thicken. For a moment, neither of them moved. The woman's calm presence contrasted sharply with the officer's now tight, uneasy stance. His thoughts began to race. What was she doing in this part of town? Was she out here undercover? Did she know about his recent performance review? He couldn't remember the last time his superior had called him into her office, but the dread that filled his chest now was unmistakable. "Is there a problem, officer?" Lisa asked, her voice still calm but laced with something he couldn't quite place. For a second, he didn't answer. His mind raced, piecing together the realization. This wasn't just another traffic stop. This wasn't just some woman driving home. This was someone who had the power to make his life, and his career, very difficult. If not ended altogether. He wasn't prepared for this. He cleared his throat and tried to mask the panic creeping up inside him. I just need to confirm your information, ma'am," he stammered, scanning her documents again, trying to stall, trying to regain control of the situation. But Lisa didn't flinch. She didn't budge an inch. "Officer," she said, her voice lowering just enough that it caught his attention. "I think you know exactly who I am. And I think you know why I'm not someone you want to be making trouble for tonight." Martin's heart skipped a beat. His breath caught in his throat. He was a seasoned cop, trained to handle any situation, but nothing prepared him for this. He looked around nervously, as if the street itself might be watching. His hand shook slightly as he held her license. Could she sense his fear? "Is there something I can do for you?" she asked, her tone still eerily calm, but this time, there was a layer of tension beneath it. The officer had a split second to make a choice. He could play it cool, try to salvage the situation and pretend everything was normal, or he could reveal his own fear, his own uncertainty. But as he looked at Lisa, something inside him knew that he wasn't in control anymore. She was in control. And that was the last thing he expected. What did she know? What was she planning? Was this just a routine stop, or was there something bigger at play here, something that would put both of their lives in jeopardy? With a gulp, Martin finally spoke, his voice trembling slightly. I think you need to come with me, ma'am. I need to run your information again, just to make sure there's no mistake." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "I'm afraid there's no mistake, officer. But I think you're about to find out just how wrong you are about me." The tension between them was palpable. And before Officer Martin could respond, Lisa added in a low, controlled voice, "I'm the head of internal affairs. And I've been watching you." What happened next would not only change Officer Martin's life, it would send shockwaves through the entire department. The night had only just begun, and already, the stakes were higher than either of them could have ever imagined. Officer Martin's heart was pounding, a heavy thud in his chest that seemed to echo in the silence between them. He blinked a few times, trying to process what Lisa had just said. Internal affairs, he had heard the whispers, of course, the rumors that the department had been under close scrutiny for months, with allegations of corruption, discrimination, and misconduct swirling around. He knew there were people in positions of power who were trying to clean things up, but he hadn't expected to be standing in front of one of them tonight. Lisa's calm demeanor only added to his discomfort. She didn't seem nervous. She didn't seem to care about the cop standing in front of her. She wasn't rattled by the flashing lights or the potential for a confrontation. In fact, it felt like she'd been waiting for this moment all along. "Internal affairs," Martin repeated, more to himself than to her. His voice had lost some of its earlier authority, and the realization of just how much trouble he might be in was starting to settle in. He shifted his weight, feeling the nervous sweat beginning to trickle down his back. "What's that supposed to mean, exactly?" Lisa didn't answer him directly. Instead, she let the silence stretch, just long enough for him to stew in it. Then, with a slight shift in her posture, she looked straight into his eyes, her gaze unwavering. "It means, Officer Martin, that everything you've done, the choices you've made, the actions you've taken, are under investigation. It means that your career is about to come under serious scrutiny. And I'm the one who gets to decide what happens next." The words landed like a punch to his gut. He had heard about IA investigations, how careers could be destroyed with a single wrong move, how officers who thought they were untouchable could suddenly find themselves in a nightmare of paperwork, hearings, and internal reviews. But this was different. Lisa Johnson wasn't just some faceless bureaucrat behind a desk. She was the head of it all. She was the one who held the power, the authority, the keys to his future, and she was standing right in front of him, calm as ever, with that unreadable expression on her face. Martin's mind raced. Did she know? Did she already have evidence? Had someone tipped her off about his mistakes, his slip-ups? He thought back over the past few months, the little things. The times when he'd bent the rules. The minor offenses he'd overlooked, the moments when he'd looked the other way. Nothing big, just small things that seemed insignificant at the time. But now, in the face of Lisa's cold certainty, they all seemed to loom large, like cracks in a foundation that was finally beginning to crumble. He swallowed hard. What are you going to do about it? The words left his mouth before he could stop them, desperation creeping into his voice. The idea of losing everything, the badge, the respect, the life he'd built, it was too much to bear. Lisa didn't flinch. Instead, she took a slow breath, her eyes never leaving his. That depends on you, Officer Martin. This could be as simple as a warning, or it could be the beginning of something much bigger. A full investigation. A public scandal. Your entire career on the line. She let those words hang in the air, heavy and final. But I'll tell you this, you've got one chance to fix things. One chance to show me who you really are. The silence stretched again. Martin opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. He had no idea what she wanted from him, no idea what she was trying to prove, but there was one thing he did know for certain, he had just stepped into something far deeper than he could have imagined. In that moment, everything about the situation felt wrong. The way she spoke to him, the way she carried herself, the coldness in her eyes, it was all so deliberate, so controlled. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was always one step ahead, like she had planned this encounter from the very beginning. But why? Was she just testing him, or was there something more to this? Why are you here, then? Martin finally asked, his voice strained. If you're not here to arrest me or take me in, what do you want from me? Lisa didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced around the street, as if considering something in the distance. Her gaze flickered to the darkened houses nearby, the empty sidewalks. Then, after a long pause, she looked back at him and said, I'm here to find out whether you're the kind of man who'll take responsibility for his actions. The kind of man who'll stand up when things get tough, or the kind who'll fold under pressure. She leaned slightly forward, her tone growing even colder. This is your moment, Officer Martin. Your chance to decide if you're going to be part of the solution or part of the problem. Her words stung. Part of the solution, part of the problem, he'd never thought of himself as part of any problem. He was a cop, damn it. He did his job. He followed the rules. Or at least, he tried to. But now, standing here with Lisa Johnson, it felt like everything he thought he knew about himself, about his career, his choices, his place in the world, was being called into question. The worst part was that he couldn't deny it. Somewhere deep down, he knew she was right. He had made mistakes, small ones, but mistakes all the same. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had let the system slip by him. He had taken the easy way out. He'd ignored things he should have confronted. And now, standing in front of Lisa, it felt like the walls were closing in. Listen, Martin said, trying to regain some of his composure. If there's something you want me to do, just say it. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. He wasn't sure if the words felt genuine, but he knew he had to say something. Anything to try and save face. Lisa didn't respond right away. She just studied him for a moment, her gaze calculating, her expression unreadable. Then, without warning, she stepped back, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of her lips. You're already making the right choice, she said, her voice softening just slightly. But we'll see if it lasts. The silence between them stretched again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the tension-filled quiet of the first encounter. It was something heavier, something that pressed down on both of them. I'll be in touch, Lisa added, her voice no longer cold, but firm, like a promise. This isn't over. She turned and walked back to her car without another word, leaving Officer Martin standing alone on the side of the road, his mind spinning. He had no idea what Lisa was planning, but he knew one thing for sure: this encounter was only the beginning. What came next could change everything. Officer Martin stood there for a long moment, staring at the tail lights of Lisa's car as she drove away. The sound of the engine fading into the night seemed to echo in his mind, reverberating in his chest like a countdown to something he couldn't quite grasp. He knew that what had just happened wasn't some random encounter. He had been on edge before, but now, it felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. The kind of cliff you never knew was there until you were too close to back away. His mind kept replaying the conversation, over and over. One chance to fix things, her words were like a curse, hanging in the air long after she'd gone. He didn't know what she meant by fixing things. Did she want him to rat out other officers? Expose some kind of corruption within the department? Or was this just a test, a warning to keep him in line? Whatever it was clear that he couldn't just go back to life as normal. Things had changed in that brief exchange. He wasn't the same officer he had been when he first pulled her over, and neither was she. He let out a long breath, trying to shake off the nervous energy that still pulsed through him. With his hand still clutching her license, he turned and made his way back to his patrol car. He had to go back to the station. There was paperwork to file, reports to write. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like just another night at the office. It felt like the start of something much bigger. The drive back to the precinct was quiet. He didn't even turn on the radio, his mind too consumed with the encounter. Internal affairs, the words felt like a weight, dragging him down. He knew there were things happening in the department, things that no one talked about, whispers that only got louder as time went on. The rumors about corruption, discrimination, favoritism. The cases that had gone unsolved, the officers who had covered for each other. Martin had always tried to turn a blind eye, tried to tell himself that he was just doing his job, that he wasn't part of the problem. But now, with Lisa's words still echoing in his mind, he wasn't so sure. As he parked his car in the station lot, he spotted his partner, Officer Bennett, standing near the entrance, smoking a cigarette. Bennett gave him a nod as he approached, his usual easygoing smile on his face. But something in Martin's posture must have betrayed him, because Bennett's smile faded when he saw the look on his face. "You okay, man?" Bennett asked, flicking his cigarette to the ground and stepping closer. Martin hesitated for a second, his hand still gripping the door handle. He didn't know if he could talk to Bennett about this, not yet. Not until he figured out what was happening. But the weight of the encounter was too much to ignore. He needed to say something. "I just had a run-in with Lisa Johnson," he muttered, his voice low. Bennett raised an eyebrow. "What? The head of IA?" He let out a short laugh. "What the hell did you do, man?" Martin didn't answer at first. He couldn't. He wasn't even sure he knew what he'd done. He'd pulled over a woman, an ordinary traffic stop, or so he thought, and somehow, it had turned into something far more complicated. The last thing he needed right now was to get his partner involved in whatever was happening. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't carry this alone. "Look, I don't know," Martin said finally, his voice strained. She pulled me over. But she knows who I am. She knows about the stuff going on in the department. She said I was under investigation." Bennett's expression shifted from casual to serious in an instant. "Under investigation? What for?" Martin shook his head, the frustration building inside him. "I don't know." She didn't say much. "Just that everything I've done, every decision I've made, is being looked at. And she made it sound like I was being watched. Like I'm next on the chopping block." Bennett took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "Shit, man. That's not good. IA doesn't mess around. I know, Martin muttered. And I'm starting to think I've got more to answer for than I realized. He ran a hand over his face. I've been turning a blind eye to things. The stuff they've been talking about in the department. The corruption, the favoritism, the cover-ups. But I never thought it would come back on me. Bennett didn't respond immediately. He just studied Martin, as if weighing whether or not he should say anything more. Finally, he exhaled slowly and spoke. Listen, you're not the only one who's heard the rumors. We've all seen things, heard things, but no one wants to stick their neck out. Especially not now, with everything that's going on. He paused, his expression hardening. But IA? They're after something. They've been sniffing around for months. If they're coming for you, it's because they already have something. I'd be careful, man. Martin's chest tightened. They already have something, the thought lingered like a poison, seeping into his veins. He had tried to play it safe, keep his head down, follow the rules. But now, it felt like everything he had done, every choice he had made, was coming back to haunt him. What if they were watching his every move? What if they already had him in their sights? I don't know what to do, Martin admitted, his voice low. Bennett clapped him on the back, a bit too hard for comfort. You do what you've always done, man. Do your job. Keep your head straight. And if they come for you, you fight. But don't do anything stupid. IA doesn't take kindly to mistakes. Martin nodded absently, still lost in his thoughts. As they entered the station, the weight of Bennett's words settled in. But just as he thought he might be able to shake it off, a voice called out from behind them. Hey, Martin. Got a minute? Martin turned, his heart sinking as he saw Sergeant Walker approaching. Walker was one of the senior officers in the precinct, well-respected and well-liked, but always in the know about what was really happening behind closed doors. The fact that he was approaching now, with a serious look on his face, made Martin's stomach twist. Yeah, what's up? Martin said, trying to keep his tone casual. We need to talk, Walker said, his expression unreadable. In my office. Now. As Martin followed him down the hallway, the tension in his chest built again. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the eyes of everyone in the precinct seemed to follow him. What was happening? What did they know? When they reached Walker's office, the sergeant shut the door behind them, his eyes sharp as he turned to face Martin. Take a seat, Walker said, his voice low. Martin hesitated before sitting. He could feel the weight of this conversation pressing down on him, the air thick with something unspoken. He wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was certain, his life was about to change. Martin sat down in the chair across from Sergeant Walker, his mind racing. The dim light of the office cast long shadows, and for the first time in a long while, the familiar space felt suffocating. Walker shut the door with a soft click, and the silence between them felt like it stretched for miles. Something's going on, Martin, Walker began, his voice low but firm. I don't know if you've noticed, but IA's been digging deeper lately. A lot deeper than usual. Martin tried to keep his composure, but the knot in his stomach twisted tighter. He thought back to his encounter with Lisa, to the way she'd looked at him, almost like she knew something he didn't. Something bigger, she had warned him that his career was on the line. Was this what she had meant? Was Walker here to confirm it? Or was he about to find himself in a situation he couldn't escape? IA, Martin said, his voice barely a whisper, they're looking at everyone, aren't they? Walker didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed his arms and studied Martin with a cold, calculating gaze. Not just everyone, he said slowly. They're looking at you, Martin. And they're not the only ones. The words hit Martin like a punch to the gut. He had expected something to come out of his meeting with Lisa, but he hadn't anticipated this. He hadn't expected everyone to know, to be looking at him as if he were the one under investigation. Walker leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "We've got a problem. And I need you to listen closely. You're not just being watched by IA. There's something else going on, something that goes deeper than what anyone's been told. There are people in this department who've been covering up more than just mistakes, Martin. There's been corruption. Big corruption. And IA's starting to piece it together. The kind of corruption that could bring this whole department down if it comes to light." The room felt smaller now, suffocating in a way that made it hard to breathe. Martin tried to process what Walker was saying, but it didn't make sense. Corruption in the department? He had always known there were cracks in the system, but this was something else entirely. "Who's involved?" Martin finally asked, his voice hoarse. Walker shook his head. "I don't know yet. But I do know that IA's been tracking it for months. And I know they've got their sights set on some of the senior officers. Big names. People who've been getting away with things for years. And you, Martin, you're caught in the middle of it." Martin felt his pulse quicken, his mind spinning. He hadn't asked for any of this. He hadn't asked to be tangled in something this dangerous. But now, it was clear, he wasn't just in the line of fire. He was right in the thick of it. "Look," Walker continued, his voice lowering, "I'm telling you this because I need you to make a decision. You've got a choice. You can stay out of it, keep your head down, keep doing your job. Or you can step up and be a part of something bigger. But you need to know this, if you get caught in the crossfire, there's no coming back from it. You'll be as dirty as they are." Martin felt the weight of the decision pressing on him like a ton of bricks. He'd always prided himself on doing things the right way, on standing by his own sense of justice. But now, with everything on the line, he was beginning to realize that doing the right thing wasn't as simple as he thought. The choices before him weren't black and white, they were muddied by corruption, lies, and power. "Who else knows?" Martin asked, his throat dry. Walker didn't answer immediately, his gaze shifting for a moment as if he were weighing his next words. Finally, he leaned in close, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't have to worry about IA. They're already on to you. But there are others, people in the department who've been working with IA. People you know. People who you might have trusted." The air in the room seemed to thicken, and Martin's mind raced. He couldn't think straight. Who could it be? Who was involved? Was Bennett in on this? The thought of it made his stomach churn. He had known Bennett for years. They'd worked together countless times, had each other's backs. But what if everything they'd done together had been a lie? "I don't know what to do, Walker," Martin said, his voice cracking. "I don't even know who to trust anymore." Walker's expression softened, but only for a moment. "That's the thing, Martin. You can't trust anyone. You've got to decide what you're willing to risk. The department's not what it used to be. It's not just about keeping your badge anymore. It's about what you stand for." Martin closed his eyes for a second, the weight of the decision hanging over him. He thought about his family, his career, everything he had worked for. And then he thought about Lisa, the way she had looked at him, the way she had spoken. There was something about her that made him think she wasn't just looking for someone to break. She was looking for someone who would stand up, someone who would make a difference. And that was what terrified him. "Do you know what's going to happen?" Martin asked, looking at Walker. Walker hesitated, his eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty. "No one does. But you can be sure of one thing, if this goes public, it won't just affect you. It'll affect the whole city. The people we're supposed to protect. All of us." Martin nodded slowly, trying to swallow the lump that had formed in his throat. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a 1,000-pound stone. But before he could speak again, the door to the office opened, and a voice from the hallway broke the tense silence. "Sergeant, you need to see this." Walker stood up quickly, his face hardening. He motioned for Martin to stay seated. "Stay here," he said, his tone urgent. "We'll talk more later. Don't go anywhere." As Walker left the room, Martin sat in the dim office, the echoes of the conversation still bouncing around in his head. He had been handed a choice, one that could destroy everything he had worked for, or save it. But no matter what he decided, it was clear that this wasn't just about his career anymore. This was about something much bigger than him. Something that could tear apart everything they'd built. And just as he thought he might finally get a moment to breathe, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his hands trembling. The message was simple, but it sent a chill down his spine. "They know." Martin's heart raced as he stared at the message. "They know." The words felt like a bomb dropped in the middle of his mind, scattering his thoughts into 1,000 pieces. It was one thing to suspect he was being watched, to feel the weight of every decision hanging over him, but this? This was confirmation. Someone had found out about his meeting with Lisa. Someone knew that he was teetering on the edge, caught between loyalty and the truth. And if that message was true, that meant one thing: there was a leak. The door to the office opened, and Martin quickly stuffed the phone back into his pocket, as if somehow the act of hiding it would erase the tension gnawing at him. Walker stepped in, his face grim, his eyes scanning the room like a predator hunting its prey. "Is everything okay?" Martin asked, his voice betraying the unease that had settled deep in his chest. Walker didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved to his desk and sat down heavily, his hands clasped in front of him. He didn't meet Martin's gaze. The silence between them felt thick, suffocating. "Sergeant?" Martin pressed, the tension almost unbearable now. The urgency in Walker's body language told him something was wrong. Something had shifted. "IA's been more active than I thought," Walker finally said, his voice tight. "And I'm starting to think there's more going on than just internal investigations." Martin felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "What do you mean?" "You said IA was looking at me." "But now..." "Now, I'm not so sure," Walker said, glancing over his shoulder as if checking for anyone eavesdropping. "I got a tip earlier today. Someone in the department's been feeding IA information about certain officers who might be involved in the corruption we've been hearing about." He paused, his gaze darkening. "The thing is, Martin, the tip wasn't just about me or you. It's about someone else. Someone high up. Someone who's been playing both sides." Martin's stomach twisted. His mind scrambled for any logical explanation. "Who? Who's been feeding IA information?" Walker leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet, but I'm starting to think the leak isn't from IA." He paused, the weight of the words hanging between them. "I think someone inside our department is working with them. And I think that someone's been watching you, for a reason." The hairs on Martin's neck stood on end. His mind was reeling, trying to connect the dots. Someone within their own ranks had been spying on him, feeding IA information about everything, from his meetings with Lisa to his every move. Who could it be? Could it be Bennett? Or someone even closer to him? Someone in the department who knew his every vulnerability. What kind of reason? Martin managed to ask, his voice shaking. "Why would someone target me?" "I don't know," Walker said, his eyes dark with suspicion. "But I've got a feeling we're not dealing with just some routine corruption investigation. There's something personal about this. Someone's making a play, and they're using you as the pawn." Martin stood up suddenly, unable to stay seated any longer. The air in the room had become suffocating, pressing in on him with every passing second. "I need to know more, Walker. I need to know what's happening." Before Walker could answer, the sound of footsteps outside the door caught their attention. Both men froze, the hairs on Martin's neck prickling as he realized the steps were coming closer. The door burst open, and Officer Bennett walked in, his expression unreadable. The moment he stepped inside, Martin felt his chest tighten. His partner, his trusted partner, had just entered the room at the exact moment they were talking about the leak. Was it a coincidence? Or was this part of the trap that was slowly being set around him? Bennett's eyes darted quickly between Martin and Walker. "Sergeant, we've got a problem," he said, his voice leveled but tight. "The chief's been briefed. IA's on the move, and they're coming for us." Walker stood up abruptly, his face hardening. "What do you mean, coming for us?" "I mean they're making their move," Bennett said, his voice low, glancing over his shoulder as if to make sure no one else was listening. "There's a full-scale investigation happening right now. They're targeting certain officers they think are involved in the corruption. And we don't know who's been giving them the inside info. But it's bad, Sergeant. It's really bad." Martin's heart skipped a beat as Bennett's words sank in. IA's making their move, the full force of what that meant hit him all at once. He wasn't just caught in the middle of a corruption investigation. He was now part of an active operation, a high-stakes game with pieces moving all around him. Someone was pulling the strings, and he had no idea who. "I need to make a call," Walker said abruptly, pulling his phone from his pocket. He glanced at Bennett, then back at Martin. "Stay here. Keep your head down. We've got bigger problems now." As Walker stepped out of the office to make his call, Bennett turned to Martin, his eyes searching, calculating. Martin could feel the weight of his gaze, but this time, it wasn't the familiar, reassuring presence he'd always trusted. There was something off about Bennett now, something that made Martin's stomach churn. "I think you should lay low," Bennett said, his voice low, almost too calm. "If IA's really onto us, they could already be watching. And you don't want to be in the spotlight when it all goes down." Martin swallowed, trying to maintain his composure. But the doubt gnawing at him wouldn't go away. Bennett was too calm. Too controlled. And the way he was looking at him now, it wasn't like the old Bennett, the one he'd worked with for years. It was almost as if he were trying to assess him, figure out his next move. "Thanks, Bennett," Martin said, forcing the words out, but the air in the room was thick with something unsaid, something that sent a chill down his spine. Bennett gave a short nod before turning and leaving the room. Martin was alone again, but the silence didn't bring any comfort. Instead, it wrapped around him like a noose, pulling tighter with every passing second. Who could he trust? Was Walker on his side, or was he playing his own game? And Bennett, had Martin's partner been in on this all along? His thoughts were racing, the pressure of the situation building. But just as he began to gather his bearings, a second message buzzed in his pocket. This one was from a number he didn't recognize. "Asterisk, you're running out of time. We're watching you." Asterisk, the words hit him like a slap to the face. Martin's mind reeled, the weight of everything crashing down on him in an instant. Asterisk, they're watching him. He's been compromised, asterisk, but the question was, who was the we? The phone buzzed again, breaking through the haze of Martin's spiraling thoughts. He glanced at the screen. The same unknown number. This time, the message was short, chilling, and to the point, asterisk, you're running out of time. We're watching you, asterisk. Martin's pulse hammered in his ears as his eyes darted around the room. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of information, but nothing made sense. The walls were closing in. It was like he was standing on a precipice, surrounded by enemies, some real, some imagined. But the feeling that something, or someone, was closing in on him felt all too real. He could sense it in the air, heavy and charged, like the calm before a storm. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't just a message. It was a call. The unknown number. His heart skipped. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but something in his gut told him he couldn't. He had to answer. He swiped the screen, lifting the phone to his ear. "Hello?" His voice was steady, but inside, everything was a storm. A long pause on the other end. Then a low, familiar voice. "It's me," Lisa's voice whispered. "I think they're coming for you. And for me." The words hit him like a shockwave. His breath caught in his throat. Lisa? What did she know? Was she the one behind the messages? Had she been pulling the strings all along? "What are you talking about?" Martin managed to say, his pulse quickening. "Who's coming for us?" "I can't explain everything," Lisa said, her voice urgent. "But the investigation, it's not just about the corruption in the department. It's bigger. It's deeper. There are people in this city who've been controlling things from the shadows for years. IA's just the tip of the iceberg. I've been working on this for months, trying to get the evidence. And now, they know I'm close. They know I'm onto them." Martin's mind raced. "Who are they? What's going on?" "I can't tell you everything," Lisa repeated. "But I'll say this, there's a mole. Someone high up in the department has been feeding them information. And that mole, Martin, it's someone you trust." The ground seemed to shift beneath him. His thoughts were a whirlwind, and his heart sank with the realization that this mole was someone close. Was it Bennett? Was it Walker? Or could it be someone else entirely, someone he'd overlooked? "Lisa, who is it?" he pressed, his voice urgent. "Tell me." "I can't." "I'm sorry," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "But I can't risk it. Just trust me. You need to get out of there. Right now." Before Martin could respond, the line went dead. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. His mind was racing 1,000 miles an hour, piecing together everything he'd learned, everything he'd been told. Lisa was working with IA, had been working with IA. But what did she mean by getting too close? Was she warning him to run? Or was she leading him into a trap? His phone buzzed again, the same unknown number. It was almost as if whoever was behind these messages knew exactly when to strike. "Asterisk, you don't have much time left. They're already here." Asterisk, the message sent a cold chill down his spine. He didn't have to wonder who they were anymore. His instincts told him it was time to make a decision. He could stay and try to figure out what was happening, try to fight back against whatever corruption was festering in the department. But there was no more time to waste. The walls were closing in, and the clock was ticking. Just as he was about to leave the office, the door swung open, and there stood Bennett. His eyes were narrow, his lips pressed into a thin line. There was something about his posture now that felt off, his movements too calculated, too stiff. "Where are you going?" Bennett asked, his voice low. Martin froze, his breath catching. I need to get out of here," he said, his voice hoarse. He had to act, had to move fast. Something in the way Bennett was looking at him now made his stomach turn. "You think you can just run?" Bennett asked, his voice cold. "You think I'm just going to let you walk out of here?" Martin's mind flashed with doubt. His gut was telling him something he didn't want to believe. Bennett had been his partner for years, but everything was pointing toward him being part of this twisted game. The corruption. The leaks. The sudden surveillance. All of it led back to someone with the inside track on everything. And that someone was Bennett. "You're not going anywhere," Bennett repeated, his tone hardening. Why? Martin shot back, his voice tight with anger and fear. What's going on, Bennett? Why are you doing this? Bennett didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving Martin's face. Martin's body tensed, his instincts screaming at him to move. To get away. But before he could take another step, the door burst open again, and Sergeant Walker stormed into the room, his face flushed with anger. Martin, get down! Walker shouted. Everything happened at once. There was a loud crack, like a gunshot, followed by the sound of shuffling, the unmistakable rush of adrenaline flooding the air. Bennett's expression shifted, his hand going to his side as though to pull something from his jacket, but it was too late. Walker's voice cut through the chaos, his words sharp and commanding. Get down, now! Martin dropped to the ground instinctively, feeling the rush of wind as something, or someone, whizzed past him, just inches from his head. Then, there was a second shot, followed by a loud crash. Bennett's body hit the ground with a sickening thud. Martin didn't understand what had just happened. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he looked up, his heart hammering in his chest. There, standing in the doorway, was Lisa. She held a gun, the barrel smoking slightly. Her expression was hard, determined. But there was no warmth in her eyes now. Only cold precision. Lisa? Martin whispered, his voice barely audible. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped into the room, lowering the gun slowly. I didn't want it to go down like this, she said, her voice distant. But I didn't have a choice. You were never supposed to get involved, Martin. You should have stayed out of this. But now, she shook her head, a faint trace of regret crossing her face. Now, you know too much. Martin stared at her, his mind reeling. The woman who had once warned him, the woman who had been so calm and collected just hours ago, was now the one who had just shot his partner. His best friend. What's going on, Lisa? Martin managed, his voice hoarse. What do you want from me? Her eyes locked with his. I needed you to see the truth. All of it. I needed you to understand why this has to happen. Before he could respond, there was another crack, a flash of movement. And then, it was all over. Lisa's body slumped forward, and Martin barely had time to register what had happened before Sergeant Walker's voice filled the silence. Don't move, Martin. You're coming with me. And just like that, the world turned upside down again. Martin stood frozen, the weight of everything that had just transpired crashing down on him like a tidal wave. He had been through hell, betrayal, corruption, lies, and now, in the wake of it all, Lisa was dead. Bennett was dead. The room was thick with smoke and tension, and Walker's voice cut through the fog of confusion with a sharp command. Get up, Walker repeated, his tone more forceful this time. You're coming with me. Martin didn't move. His gaze was still locked on Lisa's lifeless body, her blood seeping into the floorboards. Everything felt like a bad dream, a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He had trusted her. He had believed she was a part of the solution. But now, the truth was undeniable, Lisa had been the one pulling the strings all along. She had been working with IA, yes, but not just that. She had been playing both sides, manipulating Martin into a position where he would be forced to make impossible choices. She had used him, and in the end, she had paid the price for it. Walker stepped forward, his boots making a hollow sound on the floor as he approached Martin. There was no anger in his eyes, no judgment. Just a cold, calculated resolve. Get up, Martin, Walker said again, quieter this time. This isn't over. You're not done yet. Martin finally moved, slowly, as if each step took more effort than the last. His mind was still reeling from the events that had unfolded in the last few hours. His heart was heavy with grief, but also with a burning question that he couldn't shake. Why? Martin finally asked, his voice hoarse. Why did you do it, Walker? Why did you shoot her? Walker didn't hesitate. He didn't flinch or look away. His eyes locked onto Martin's with a hard, unwavering gaze. Because she was the real threat, Walker said. You think IA's been investigating us for corruption? That's a lie. IA's been investigating Lisa. And the people she was working for. And when she realized they were onto her, she made a choice, one that put everyone, including you, in danger. Martin's breath caught in his throat as he processed the new information. What do you mean, the people she was working for? Not just IA, Martin. Not just the department. She was involved with something much bigger. And that something had already infiltrated the highest levels of power in this city. Lisa was caught between two forces, one that wanted to bring it all down and one that wanted to keep it going. Walker paused, his face hardening. But in the end, she couldn't control it. She couldn't escape the game she had chosen to play. Martin's mind swirled with the gravity of Walker's words. He had known that corruption ran deep, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Lisa had been a part of something far more dangerous than he had ever realized. And now, her death, her betrayal, had opened a door to something much darker. What happens now? Martin asked, his voice trembling slightly. Is it over? Is this all just finished? Walker's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but only a fraction. Then he exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something heavy. It's never over, he said. Not as long as the people who started all of this are still out there. But now, we have a choice. We can keep playing their game, or we can expose it all. Martin's head spun. He wanted to say that he was done, that he just wanted to walk away from it all. But he knew better than that. The choices had already been made for him. And now, he had a responsibility, not just to himself, but to everyone who had been affected by the corruption that had poisoned their lives. Then let's expose it, Martin said, his voice steady with determination. He felt the weight of everything, Lisa's death, the betrayal, the lies, but he also felt something else, a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about justice. About exposing the truth and taking down the people who had used the system for their own gain. Walker nodded once, his expression unreadable. I'll help you, he said simply. As they left the office, Martin couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened. He couldn't undo the past, the choices, the mistakes, the lives lost, but he could move forward. He could do something. And that, at least, was a start. They made their way through the building, the sounds of their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Martin's mind kept flashing to the moments that had led him here, the meeting with Lisa, the confrontation with Bennett, the gunshot that had ended it all. It had all happened so fast. Too fast. But now, as they approached the elevator, Walker spoke again, his voice quiet. We're not the only ones who've been watching, Martin. There are more people out there who know the truth. They've been waiting for someone to make the first move. Martin turned to him, his curiosity piqued. Who? Who else is involved in this? Walker's eyes flickered with something like regret, but it was gone in an instant. He didn't answer. Instead, he pushed the button to summon the elevator, and as the doors opened, he stepped inside. Don't worry about them, Walker said, his voice low. Just focus on what we're going to do next. The elevator doors closed behind them, and for a moment, Martin let the silence wash over him. He didn't know what the future held, or how deep the rabbit hole went. But one thing was clear, the corruption in the department, the lies that had been woven into the fabric of the system, they weren't over. They were just beginning. And now, he was a part of something much bigger than himself. A part of a story that wasn't finished yet. As the elevator descended, Martin couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was only just beginning. But whatever it was, he would face it head-on. Because in the end, justice wasn't just about the law, it was about the truth. And the truth was coming. The elevator hummed as it descended, the silence between Martin and Walker hanging in the air like an unresolved chord. Martin's mind spun with 1,000 questions. Who were the people Walker had mentioned? What was this deeper conspiracy that had pulled Lisa, Bennett, and now even him into its orbit? But the answers weren't coming, not yet. Not until they acted. As the elevator reached the ground floor, the doors opened with a soft chime, and Walker stepped out first, his movements purposeful. Martin followed, his mind still trying to piece together everything. He could feel the weight of the past hours, of all the lies, the bloodshed, the betrayals, settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. He was a player now, and the stakes had never been higher. Walker led him out of the building and into the dimly lit parking garage. There was no one around, just the distant hum of traffic from the streets above. Walker walked briskly toward his car, the only sound their footsteps echoing against the concrete. Once they were inside the car, Walker started the engine. The low rumble of the car's exhaust seemed to match the tension in the air, vibrating through Martin's chest. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside the car felt distant, as if they were already in another realm, on the verge of something they couldn't undo. "Where are we going?" Martin asked, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but his eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be tailing them. He had no idea who could be watching anymore. "Somewhere safe," Walker replied shortly, his eyes on the road. "We need to figure out who's been pulling the strings." Martin nodded, but a thought nagged at him. "You said there are people waiting for us. People who know the truth. Who are they?" Walker's grip on the wheel tightened, but he didn't answer right away. His eyes remained fixed ahead, but his jaw was clenched, as though he was weighing his words carefully. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice low. "They're a group of officers who've been on the inside for years," Walker said. "Some of them are high-ranking, others are just under the radar, but they all know what's going on. They've been watching, waiting for someone to make a move. They've been trying to get the evidence, but Lisa, she was one of their operatives. And now she's dead. They won't take that lightly." Martin's stomach dropped. "So, we're not just up against the corruption in the department? We're up against a whole network of people?" "That's right," Walker confirmed, his voice grim. "But we've got an advantage. They think Lisa was working alone. They don't know that you've seen the truth." A chill ran down Martin's spine. The truth. What truth? The more he learned, the more questions seemed to emerge, as if every answer led to another layer of the deception. He wasn't sure how much of this he could believe. Was Walker really on his side? Or was this all part of a bigger game, one he still didn't fully understand? The car turned onto a quieter street, and Walker glanced briefly at Martin. "You're going to have to trust me, Martin. I know I'm asking a lot right now. But this is bigger than just us. And if we don't act now, things are going to get worse. Faster than you think." Martin absorbed his words. Trust him? After everything that had happened, trust seemed like the one thing that was in short supply. But what choice did he have? He couldn't go back to the department, not after everything that had happened. He couldn't go back to pretending everything was normal when it was clear that nothing about this situation was. "Where are we going, exactly?" Martin asked again, his voice steadier now, the weight of the decision ahead of him settling in. A safe house, Walker said. A place where we can lay low for a bit. Figure out our next move. There's one person I need to talk to. A friend of mine who's been in this game longer than either of us. They can help us get the evidence we need. The car drove in silence for a few more minutes before Walker pulled into a nondescript building on a quiet street. It looked like any other warehouse in a city that was full of them, but Martin knew better now. He knew that looks could be deceiving. Inside that building was whatever evidence they needed to expose the people behind it all. The same people who had manipulated him, used him, and left bodies in their wake. They parked and stepped out of the car, making their way to a door at the back of the building. Walker knocked twice, and a moment later, the door opened to reveal a man in his 40s, wearing a dark suit and a pair of sunglasses, even though it was evening. "You made it," the man said, his voice low and controlled. He stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. As they entered, Martin took in the sterile, professional environment. The place was clean, quiet, and seemed to have been outfitted for one thing: getting things done under the radar. The man led them down a narrow hallway and into a small office, where a computer terminal blinked in the corner, surrounded by papers and files strewn across a table. "I'm not here for pleasantries," the man said, shutting the door behind them. "What's the situation?" Walker didn't waste time with introductions. "Lisa's dead. We need the file she was working on. The one that connects the department to the bigger players." The man's face didn't change, but his eyes darkened. "I knew this day was coming," he muttered, walking over to the desk and pulling open a drawer. He pulled out a thick folder, which he tossed onto the table in front of them. Martin's heart skipped a beat as he opened the file. It was filled with names, high-ranking officials, officers, city officials. All of them connected to a web of illegal activities, money laundering, racketeering, and worse. But there, near the bottom of the list, was a name Martin hadn't expected to see. Sergeant Walker. Martin's pulse raced. He looked up at Walker, whose face was expressionless. The truth was staring him in the face. There had been one more piece to this puzzle that Walker hadn't shared, the truth about his own involvement. But it wasn't too late. It couldn't be. Before he could process any further, the man spoke again. "I'll get you the rest of it," he said. "But know this, if you want to go public with this, it's going to cost you. People like this don't go down easy. And they don't forget." Martin met Walker's gaze, the weight of the decision bearing down on him. He knew what it meant now. The corruption ran deeper than any of them could have imagined. And exposing it would mean taking on powerful enemies, enemies who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. As they left the safe house, Martin felt the full weight of everything pressing on him. Lisa was dead, but her work wasn't in vain. The truth was out there, and he had the evidence to bring it to light. But the road ahead was going to be long, dangerous, and filled with obstacles. Whoever was behind this conspiracy wouldn't go down without a fight. And for Martin, there was no turning back now. The city, it seemed, had a lot more secrets to hide.